Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mavens of Data. We've got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about the importance of having product skills on your data teams. We've got Bethany Lyons here, amazing background. She's going to be a ton of fun, and I think she's got a really unique perspective as somebody who's been on the data side, on the product side. It's going to be really fascinating to hear from her. These are some of the questions we are going to be getting into. Uh, you know, we're not going to just follow these where it'll be more of a free flowing conversation, but these are some things I promise that we'll hit. And with that, it'd be really interesting to hear kind of about the overlap that you see between product skills and data skills. Like, how transferable have your skills been going from one type of a role to another?
Yeah, so I think I guess first I'll say like what is special about product management as different to like being an IT service desk. And I think it's all about delivering value at scale, whereas an IT service desk kind of model is more about delivering output, and it doesn't necessarily scale. It's kind of one-off. So that's like the biggest difference. And I think if you really want to have impact on a data team, it's crucial to deliver value at scale. You need to know that like the work that you're doing is actually impacting business outcomes and isn't just, a dashboard that nobody looks at. And you also want to be able to impact multiple people, multiple use cases with the work that you're doing, as opposed to processing them individually one by one as the requests come in like a semi-reactive way. Another thing about product management is, there's the old adage of like, people don't know what they want. If you asked people what they wanted, they would say faster horses. And you see that in data as well. Like, if you actually deliver the request as it's asked, you're often not giving the customer what they need. You're giving them what they think they need. So a lot of data work is about reframing the requirements and making sure you understand the business problem so that you can deliver on the actual need, not the customer's understanding of their need, because their understanding of their need is often influenced by what they believe is possible. And what they believe is possible, you're kind of the expert as the data person and the product manager, not the customer. They don't necessarily understand the technology and the realm of possibility. So that's kind of a brief summary of where I see the overlap.
Yeah, I love that. And that sort of like taking a business person's request and sometimes having to reframe it or say, hey, have you thought about this? I think I might even have a better solution than the thing you're looking for, is really common across all data roles that I found. And especially if you can do that, you're seen more of like a trusted partner than just a data monkey that's like, fulfilling a specific request. That's a lot of times that's one of the big differences between junior data people and more senior trusted partners. So I love that you said that. And then another thing that you said that I haven't really heard a lot from our guests is thinking about scale, which I think is so smart. Like, now that you're back on the data engineering side, what are some ways that you like kind of put that scale thinking into process? I'm really curious to try to make it concrete for some folks in our audience.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll tell you about like one of I've been at one client only for the 6 months that I've worked at this consultancy. I'm now on maternity leave, but from May until the end of October, I was working for like a hedge fund brokerage type organization. And they have something like 40 people that manually do reconciliation. So just checking like what's the invoices that we've created, and then like, does that match the money that's actually hit the bank? And so I'm like looking at this and I'm like, well, I can just build an algorithm that does that automatically. And then we can put those 40 people to like higher value problems, and while also de-risking the mistakes that can happen when you're doing like manual. Human error is huge. And, if you can lose when you're moving around like $50 million, like there isn't room for human error in that type of manual process. So I've been kind of approaching it in stages, which is, stage one, for one organization, do I take a business process and automate it across multiple people and multiple teams? So it's kind of like I'm one person doing the job of 40 people. So there's like the element of scale. And then the next element of scale is like, okay, reconciliation is, I think, actually a bigger industry than BI. Because you can survive as a business without BI. And this is what most data professionals are doing is business intelligence. You can run your if your dashboard doesn't load, like you can still run your business.
Yeah.
But if your payments don't reconcile with your invoices, you're screwed. And so I actually think reconciliation is a more critical business problem than BI, and one that like data teams haven't fully got involved in. And it's business people solving this problem through the best way that they know how, which is manual inspection and Excel. So the next element is like, how do I take what I've delivered in a consulting engagement and scale that across like multiple clients? And in the first instance, it'll probably be like brokerage firms in London, like commodities brokerage firms. So there's, I don't know, maybe 20 of those. So that's the second stage of scale. And then the third stage of scale is maybe like looking outside of like the commodities businesses to like all hedge funds. And then the fourth stage of scale is like, how do we just automate reconciliation, like across like all fintechs and financial services organizations? So I kind of, a part of the reason I left product management back in May was I felt like I'd become so distanced from the market by being in product for 5 years. It's really hard to actually understand what are the problems people are trying to solve when you're in the PM seat, because you aren't doing the solutioning yourself. Whereas when you're a consultant, you're building the solution yourself. And so you have a way better understanding of the problem. So I left product management to become a data engineer so that I could like get the market intelligence I need to figure out what my next product job is. And that's kind of the way I view a good career is like, don't do one thing forever, like oscillate between the two so that you're constantly keeping fresh. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, it was a great answer. And I saw in the chat from Corey saying, "Hey, this is really resonating with my new role." So like you're definitely hitting the mark for Corey. Corey, it'd be great to hear a little more about your new role in the chat there. One of the things, Bethany, that I loved, and I think like this could also apply to folks who aren't even in consulting but are just internal or trying to have a long and fruitful career in data. The idea that you came up with this solution for one client, and now you're thinking about like, how do I reuse that same solution and package it and make it valuable over and over again? And I think that's like a perfect example of your product thinking that we don't have enough of in data sometimes, because over the course of a data career, you might solve a similar problem for a company you worked at 3 companies ago, but you might not really still have that solution. And one of the things that I heard some great advice. I was talking with Andrew Jones on one of our shows a few weeks back, and he said, he's like, I've always kept this a file of different projects that I've worked on, and I even keep little snippets of code. Try not to get in trouble doing this. Don't take anything that would get you in hot water. But he said what's really amazing now, after having kind of a long career in data, is he goes into a new company and needs to solve a problem for them, and he's probably solved something very similar before, and just looks like an absolute genius that he can kind of pull up the work he's done before, because he's had a similar mentality to what you have, which is scalability and reusability of these processes and these solutions. But he's one of the only other people I've heard talk about that within our space. So I really like that advice, and I hope folks can take that away. And that's one of the ways that as you build a longer career, you can kind of build on that momentum and that experience, and not necessarily have to keep reinventing the wheel. So yeah, that's really, really cool advice. I'm curious, Bethany, to kind of back up a little bit for folks that like you and I have both been a product manager before, so like totally get what that role is. It might be interesting to just like talk about kind of what that role entails. And, I think folks would love to hear about the experience at Tableau, and that might sort of help people think through that. Would you be able to talk about kind of like what your role was like when you were being a product manager at Tableau?
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll talk about what I built. I think that might be the most concrete way, because I think we probably have a lot of folks on the line that are even familiar with Tableau. So one of the things I worked on was the noodle. Anybody who knows Tableau, like it's basically for the first, I don't know, 15 to 17 years of Tableau's life, you could only connect to a single flat table of data. And I worked on the project where, we basically said that's like 5% of use cases. Like data is not flat. Data is multidimensional, and you need to be able to combine data at different granularities in your analysis. So I worked on the noodle, the relationship link that allowed you to build these multi-table data models. And Tableau just released one of the things I worked on. It took forever because there was so much tech debt to refactor. They just released shared dimensions. I don't know, like in the last year. I actually worked on that starting in 2016. It took like 8 years to see the light of day, because that's how much tech debt you have in a 20-year-old product. But yeah, so a lot of in a very established kind of incumbent, a lot of the job of a product manager is to champion an idea and get buy-in from leadership to fund it. And that was a lot of what I did at Tableau, was like building the evidence case for like why we need to fund this thing in the first place. Like we had Adam Selipsky as the CEO of Tableau. He'd come from AWS. He knew nothing about data visualization and analysis. And he's like, this project requires 8 years and 100 people. Like, why in God's green earth should I fund this? So I had to build up the business case and like customer evidence for like why this is going to help us compete with Power BI and retain customers and so on. So that was a lot of what I did at Tableau. And then like once you build the case, you then need to defend like why we should keep doing this, because people get really impatient with a project of that size and that duration. Like it's people get like in the leadership team, they would get frustrated about like, why is this not shipping? And so then you need to continue to make the case for like, why should we keep funding this? So that was part of what I did at Tableau. Then when I joined Kawa as a startup, I did basically the opposite. In a tiny startup where you have no money and you're like fighting for survival, you want to do the exact opposite. You don't want to be like investing in big, long, expensive projects. You want to be figuring out, how do we ship the minimum thing that solves like one problem that will enable us to sell this product to customers. So when I was in Kawa, I actually ended up as the CPO doing a lot more sales than product. Because you like, yeah, there it's like the only evidence of whether you have a valuable product is, are people willing to pay for it? And so I went around trying to be like, do you want to pay for it now? No. Okay, let's change the product. Do you want to pay for it? No. Okay, let's change the product. Are you willing to pay for it now? Ah, yes. $300,000. Thank you. We'll take that. This is starting to be proof of product market fit. So it's hard to say like that whether product management is, it's sort of like the job differs so much based on the stage of the company. Like that I would almost say you should qualify yourself as a pre-product market fit like 0 to 1 type PM versus like a PM that works in incumbents on like how to retain Fortune 500 companies that are locked into multi-year contracts. Those are just like two vastly different skill sets and jobs. So yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I've had similar experience being at like really large public company and being at startup with no revenue yet. So I've kind of done the full spectrum. I'm curious to hear your thoughts for folks. Folks in our audience might be thinking like, do I want to do a startup? Do I want to go for a larger company like Tableau, owned by Salesforce? How would you talk to folks who are not sure about which path is right for them? Like what, how do they figure that out?
I think a lot of it comes down to your risk tolerance, because a startup is like very, very high risk. Your chance of success is like 1%. Your chance of failure is like 99%. So are you okay with that? But then it also, like, the other thing is it comes down to impact. You can have a way bigger impact in an early stage startup. You are determining whether the company lives or dies. Whereas in like a large established company, it's like, could I ever describe the revenue impact that I had on Tableau? Like, no. Like, there's no way to unpick what the shared dimensions and relationships feature, what revenue impact that has, because there's so many inputs. So like, I have a strong instinct and intuition that, we built the thing that was the number one competitive differentiator of Power BI. So I think like we probably slowed a lot of churn to Power BI. That's probably the biggest impact I can say that I had. But that impact is muted by the fact that Power BI is like mostly free, which was something that like I wasn't able to work on the pricing strategy. That was above my pay grade. That's sort of like the CPO and the CEO do the pricing strategy, and that ultimately has a much larger impact than the features that you build. So yeah, it comes down to impact and risk.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to talk about it. We have Jade here in the chat that just said we're 18 minutes in, and this is already required learning for entrepreneurial thinking data analysts. So people are loving the tips here, Bethany. I'm going to add a little on that, the big company versus the startup, because I totally feel the same way. I remember my last large public company that I was at. I remember literally hearing like, we can't promote you any higher because you're too young. And like you need more, and it's going to ruffle feathers. And I'm like, and that is just something that's not a thing at an early stage startup. Yeah. At an early stage startup, it's like, hey, we have so many problems to solve. Who's a smart person that we can throw work at? Like we've got,
or the really founder is 17.
yeah, exactly. And like we've got really young people at Maven that we've given really large areas of responsibility for our business and are making a huge impact. We like, their age is not a relevant factor. We just have to solve these problems, so that's something I think, especially if you're early, you can have a lot more impact. You can have a lot more responsibility. Sometimes, like if it's your first job, it might be a little hard in a startup. Like you might not get the formal like training and things like that. Like I started at a really big company, and there was an analyst department that was like 70 analysts, and we had, these really formal buddy systems and code reviews and stuff like that. And there were so many people to learn from. So for me, that was awesome to start at a really big company. But then the other, like, if I could have changed my career, I would have got out of big companies earlier and gone to a startup at like job number 2, because it's so fun, in my opinion. But that's not for everybody,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's awesome.
I can add to this. So I was really young when I joined. Well, not really young, but relatively young when I joined Tableau. I was like 23, I think. It was my first job out of university. And I was like one of the youngest people on the team. And I then was not young when I left Tableau. I was like in my 30s by the time I left. And somebody told me, who had joined recently, he had actually advised me to quit Tableau. And I was like, what, why do you think I should quit? And he's like, well, you were really young when you joined, and the people who have been around for your entire journey still see you as a 23-year-old, even though you're, 32. He's like, I see you as a 32-year-old because I joined when you were 32, but like, the people who have been around since the early days still see you as 23. And, so you should quit and go be 32 at another company. And I took that advice. I was like, he's right. Like, that was actually holding me back, was in a big corporate, is like the perception of your age at the time you joined among the old guard, if you will.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I'm thinking about that in my career, folks that I worked with like 15 years ago when I was 22, 24, whatever. Um, they probably still, if they haven't worked with me in 15 years, they're still picturing me as like that green kid, the entry
Yeah.
level role. It's kind of funny to think about that. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
great advice.
And also, like, you just do dumb stuff when you're in your early 20s. And I did a lot of dumb stuff. Like,
yeah.
start over somewhere new where people don't know that history.
I'm curious, are there any kind of like career mistakes or anything like that, speaking of dumb stuff, that you wish you had a do-over and you'd give advice to folks to learn from?
Yeah, I think my biggest mistake was like being too passionate. Like, you'll be hard pressed to find people that like love Tableau as much as I loved Tableau back in the day. And I think that impeded me because when I would like talk about things like to the leadership team, they were like, but the customers aren't as passionate as you about the product. And we need to view things from the customer's perspective. We need to view things from the perspective of the people who hate our product, not from the perspective of people who love our product. And I was always arguing like, oh, if we build XYZ, then like these people who are like fans will become super fans. And they're like, that's actually not the goal. The goal is to try and make the haters like moderate users. So actually, I think, being too passionate was probably one of the biggest hindrances in my career. And like being able to be a little bit more indifferent allows you to be like more credible, more level-headed, and see things from like different people's perspectives. So yeah, I joined a company where I didn't love the product as much, and I think it actually made me a better product person.
That's awesome. No, that's really, really interesting advice. I'm curious, like kind of the flip side of that. Are there any moments that were like major inflection points for you, or things that like once you realized something or got some good advice, it really accelerated your career that you'd be able to share with anybody?
Yeah, I'm going to answer this one really honestly because it's just the right answer. It was when I got diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I was like, oh, that is literally like the passion is literally a disease. That's actually it's a psychiatric condition that needs to be like medicated and controlled. And there was a lot of my colleagues who, when I shared with them this diagnosis, they were like, yeah, we kind of figured. They were like not surprised at all. And I was like, oh, like, why didn't you tell me? And turns out people don't want to like volunteer diagnoses to their colleagues. But I think since receiving treatment for that, it's actually helped me to be less passionate, more level-headed, more indifferent, and more open to like, should we do A or B, as opposed to let's do A and I'm going to drive this forward with like the full force of like a manic episode.
Wow. I mean, that's like you said, very honest answer. And I'm glad you shared it. I mean, definitely making yourself vulnerable here, and really appreciate that. And I think it's a great, like a broader theme of kind of knowing yourself and, really doing what's best for you. That, we're all different. I think that's really, really good advice there. Yeah. And makes sense that I'm glad your coworkers didn't try to self-diagnose you either too. I feel like that's probably good advice too. Amazing. How about any other advice? Like, how about for somebody who isn't in data yet, and they're trying to get their first job, or maybe they're in that first job? A lot of folks in our audience are that like aspiring analyst, or maybe they're an analyst and they're trying to move up to senior analyst, or potentially data scientist to senior data scientist. Any advice for like an early career person like that specifically?
I would say don't worry about titles. Like, what matters is experience. And I think when I look at experience, the experience you get if you work for like a consultancy as like a data engineer is vastly different to the experience you get if you work for a corporate. Because at the corporate, you're exposed to one customer. Whereas if you work for a consultancy, you're exposed to like end customers. And so I think it can really accelerate your career if you're working for a consultancy and you're able to see like what are end customers doing, because then you start to see patterns and you're like, it's very hard if you're working for a corporate to be like, is this thing unique to my company or is this like a general market trend? When you work for a consultancy, you can say definitively like, this thing is unique to this company, whereas this other thing is a general market trend. So like, for example, reconciliation, like I know it's like a general market problem, not just like a, one commodities brokerage firm problem. And from there, you can then develop, like you can transition your consultancy experience into product management experience because you have exposure to problems at scale. So yeah, I would say like, whether you're a data scientist, data engineer, what the title is, doesn't really matter. Focus on broad exposure where you can. And then another thing is, probably even, I actually take back my first answer. I want to give a new answer, which is be part of a revenue generating center. And if you're working for an internal data team at a corporate, like you're a cost center on their P&L, no matter what you do, you are a cost center. If you work for a consultancy, you are a revenue center because you are their business. That's why I work for a data consultancy. And like, I haven't joined like the client, even though I've been on one client. I'm like, I'm a revenue center. If I work for the consultancy, I'd be a cost center if I joined the client. So you're just more indispensable to your company.
Yeah, I love that one. And that's something, again, like people who are like on the data side don't really think about a lot. And one thing that was interesting, I joined a startup as the first analyst, so first person with any like specific data title, and I had to pitch that role, and it was like a hybrid role where I said I'd also manage your paid search. So I was like a half analyst, and I was the 60th person at that company, before they had an analyst. And then I've joined startups as a marketing person, where I've been the fourth person in the company, and I've done that 2 times. So like because marketing is a revenue center versus like just strictly data, and so it doesn't necessarily mean you need to be out of data, but think like, how can I influence revenue centers, like whether it's like being a product analyst or being a marketing analyst, and maybe trying to have a little bit of that P&L responsibility along with your role, or at least being the person that's advocating for revenue, for cost savings, more than just like making reports. Sometimes I talk about it as being a playing field analyst versus being a scoreboard analyst, like being really, really focused on the results and revenue. So I think that's really good advice. And I like that you had 2 answers, and I did like your first answer a lot about being on a consultancy. I've had experience both ways too. And my first role was in a consultancy, and I think same thing. Not only do you learn like the different data processes that people have and just get a chance to learn from different people and perspectives, you also get to see different business models. And you sort of like, if you're just working on one business model, that's the whole world that but if you have 20 different clients over the course of a few years, you just start to develop your business acumen around like, how do businesses make money? Like, how do they think about their margins, and how do they get new customers, and how do they build their products? And there's definitely some benefits to doing that. I'd say everybody should try it at least once and see if you like it. So
yeah, totally.
That's really good advice, folks. I would love to turn this around, put Bethany in the hot seat. So this one's from Alawesian. And the question is, what skills do I need to learn if I'm a data analyst? So maybe data analyst more generally, and I'm trying to become a product analyst specifically. Great question. And a product analyst is a super fun role. So hope folks are taking notes on this one.
This is really interesting. So I would say, I'm going to just give some advice first, which is, if you're going to be a product analyst, do it in a business to consumer company. And the reason for that is, I think I've only ever worked in B2B companies, and I think there's a material difference between the way, like the work you do as a product manager and a product analyst in a B2B company versus in a B2C company. In a B2C company, like everything you build is completely driven by data. Like the checkout flow, if you have like one extra step, that could cost you millions of dollars. And that's the type of thing that you would detect as a product analyst, is like, oh, we added this extra step into our checkout flow and like our revenue dropped by X amount. In a B2B company, like there's so much more complexity and distance between the user and the customer. Because like in B2C, the customer and the user are the same person. Whereas in B2C, like the customer and the user may not actually even know each other. And so like a product analyst is you're only ever going to be able to tap into user behavioral data as a product analyst. That's mostly what you do. And the user behavioral data may have like no impact or like little impact on revenue outcomes in a B2B company because of that distance between the user and the customer. So I would say like you're way more critical to your company as a product analyst in a B2C company. So go after like a consumer-based app, like fintech type, like e-commerce sort of thing, and avoid B2B. So yeah, I don't know if that totally directly answered the question. I might have like modified the question to what I think should be asked.
No,
yeah, like go learn about e-commerce, go learn about fintech, and go learn about like consumer-based apps. Because it's that domain knowledge that will, like, the data skills are totally transferable between the two roles.
Yep.
It's that domain knowledge that will make the difference between being a data analyst and a product analyst.
I love
and then
it.
like, yeah, the other thing is there's a few products as well, like that are maybe useful to look at. Qubit is like a warehouse native product analytics product that's like kind of emerging. Houseware is another one. So you could potentially look at like what are the emerging Amplitude competitors, because that'll kind of put you on the front foot for kind of the main operating system of a product analyst as well.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I didn't think you were going to go B2C versus B2B with the answer, but I love that answer. And another reason I love that answer is like, let's say you have the B2B product that sells for $300,000. You know, you can make a pretty good business with a relatively small number of customers, right? Versus
totally.
If you sell a product that's $10 or even $100, you need a ton of customers to make a good business.
Yeah.
So you just get way more data on conversion flows and purchases. And in my career, I've mostly been on the B2C side, and I've done very well as a data person on the B2C side. And when I've tried to go on the B2B side, I have not been very effective. So like it's
a lot of opinions on the B2B side. It's manic people making business cases to Adam Slipsky on the B2B side.
Yeah, as somebody, if your superpower is going to be data, there's not as much really hard data to make those decisions, So it's I've found that very challenging versus like, on the B2C side, you're optimizing marketing channels at scale, you're optimizing websites and products at scale, and you have like tons of real data feedback. So I think if you're a data person, I agree. B2C, it's a fun place to be, getting all that data. It's there. They need you to help them with it. So yeah, fantastic advice.
Cool.
We've got another question here. This one's from Pranav. How can I transition from an analyst in a consulting environment with some intermediate data skills to a product analyst in a technology environment? So actually, I guess kind of a similar question. How to make that pivot.
An analyst in a consulting environment to a product analyst in a technology environment. It's a really similar question. I'm trying to think like what would I add to this? I think I would spend a lot of time focused on like what are the key metrics that drive a SaaS business. That's where I would start. So there's like when I worked for Muse. I kind of left this out of my abstract because I was only there for about 10 months, but I worked for Muse, which is they build a property management system. It's a hotel tech company. And their founders had about 5 metrics that they used to measure the success of the SaaS business. And so as a product analyst, like I would try and figure out like what are the 5 metrics that a founder of a SaaS business uses to decide if they're succeeding or failing. If you really understand that, then you can kind of figure out everything else from there. but that's like the foundation of where to start. So yeah,
awesome.
Try to understand the metrics that drive a SaaS business.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like I think we've talked about a little bit before on this show, like it's always very much like some flavor of revenue and customers and costs, is like that's really what we're thinking about. And people think this is super complicated, but like there a lot of businesses are quite similar. So revenue, costs, customers,
and then figure out like leading versus lagging indicators that can help drive those metrics, and like how, what, because I think product analytics data is never going to be like directly tied to revenue unless it's like a really simple e-commerce type product. You want to find like what user behavioral indicators are like leading indicators of revenue, because the revenue might come 3 months after the user behavioral action. So that's the type of thing I would try to dig into, is like leading user behavioral indicators of key business metrics.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's a great tip here. Here's another question. We're going to keep these coming for a little bit as long as they keep showing up in the tab. This is from Archita. How does demonstrating that product sense that you said is so important for data people during an interview look? So like, how do you convey that you have that product thinking when you're in, the 30-minute, hour-long interview with folks?
So I think product sense is like, I hate this term because it's kind of so open to interpretation, and there's no like uniform definition of like, does somebody have it or not? So I would focus on like, where have you made something repeatable and scale? That is product thinking. And so it doesn't have to be that you built a product. It could just be like you took this repetitive, like you took this manual process and made it automated. Like that's a level of, you've made something scalable. So if you don't have experience as a product, because it's hard to say like when you haven't actually built a product, here's my product management experience, but you probably as a data person have made something scale and made it repeatable before. So I would emphasize that in relation to like product thinking.
Yeah, I love that. And that's like automation, enabling others to do things over and over again, things like that. That's awesome. Yeah, fantastic.
And the second point would be, and then like, what impact did you have? So if you can talk about like the before and after, before people did this, then I implemented X, and now people do Y, whatever.
Yep.
If you can talk about how you actually change somebody's behavior, like that's really good too. And I would try like not to overstate your impact on the business. So if somebody comes to an interview with me and they say like, I 10x revenue, I'm like, no, you didn't get out. Like you wouldn't be interviewing for this job that I'm hiring.
Maybe from $1 to $10, but
yeah, it's like you would be running your own business if you had done that.
Yep.
But so try to keep the impact like real. It's like it's most people can't actually make a concrete statement about what impact they had on revenue, but they can make a concrete statement about the impact they had on somebody's behavior. So I would focus on talking about the impact you had on somebody's behavior.
I love it.
And then let them interpret, oh, well, that probably means that, retention improved, or like let the interviewer make the conclusion.
Yeah, it's awesome. And for me personally, as an interviewer, there's no faster way to end the interview than for me to think you're BSing and like talking nonsense about, something that you didn't really have that impact, because I catch you doing that and it's like, I can't trust anything that comes out of your mouth after that, so it's, and as a data person, your integrity and your objectivity is at the highest of the list of like what makes you valuable, right? Because if somebody, if I can't trust them, if I think it's going to be one of those people that only gives good news in the data, like that's much less valuable than somebody who shoots straight and tells it how it is. And because they give me the bad news when I did something in marketing and it stunk, and they tell me that, it's not what I want to hear, but it's what I need to hear. And then when they tell me something's good, I can actually believe it confidently, So don't, like Bethany says, definitely don't BS in an interview, because if you get caught, you're smoked.
Yeah,
awesome. Here's a specific one from Bob. Let's see if you can answer this. How involved were you with the CRM on the Salesforce side? Do most analysts need to have intimate knowledge of like a CRM table, or would that be kind of reserved for specifically a CRM admin? It's like, how important is that, I guess, for probably talking B2B companies? How important is it for an analyst to understand CRM?
So I'll answer the first question. I wasn't that involved in the CRM side of Salesforce. Like the Salesforce had its own integrated BI tool as well. I didn't really work on that. I just worked purely on Tableau. But I would say an analyst does need to have, you can't really analyze data that you don't understand. So something I found, I'll answer this more generally. I think if you're analyzing CRM data, you need to understand the process that generated the data. Otherwise, your metrics are going to be faulty, I would say. Like, so one of the things I found useful in life is, whether it's a CRM or another like trading system or whatever it is, an invoicing system or billing or whatever. One of the things I do is go and sit with a user who inputs data into that system to
actually
have them watch. Yeah. Like what's happened in the world and how does that translate into the way that you input the data in the system? Because I don't think you can reliably calculate metrics on a table when you don't understand the data generation process for that table. So I think, it's very, very important to know like how events in the world impact the generation of data that you're analyzing.
Yeah, I love that.
And that applies to CRM or anything else. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you are showing your product thinking right there with that answer, because I think probably an unfortunate truth is that a very high percentage of data analysts have never done that, have never like sat with a customer using the product to actually see how they use it and where that data comes from. A lot of people, I think, unfortunately, on the data side, like aren't even using their own product very often. I've fallen into that trap too. Whereas like for product managers, they always talk about dog fooding, which is to me always a hilarious term for, for folks who aren't familiar. It's like a dog food company eating their own dog food to taste it, which is, a ridiculous example, but it sticks in our minds. And a lot of times we don't dog food our own products as analysts. So you can kind of get disconnected as the product evolves and, you see this data, but you don't really fully understand the steps that customers are taking and stuff like that. So I think, to me, that's another great example of where that product thinking can really help analysts. So I love your answer there.
Thanks.
This one's from Nicoletta, and Nicoletta says, what were the most important skills and knowledge that you had to learn when you were transitioning from being a product manager to being on the data side? Like, what kind of gaps were there that you had to pick up?
The most important skill that you had to learn from product manager to data engineer. Okay. So I started out in data, I then moved to product, I then went back to data.
Came back, yeah.
Yeah, it was more of a return to data as opposed to a transition to data. I will say, like, probably the biggest thing was I learned to code. Because as a product manager, you don't write code. You write requirements, documents, and user stories and those types of things so that somebody else can go write the code. Whereas as a data engineer, like I need to build the algorithms myself. So I just basically picked up ChatGPT and made it my best friend.
Awesome.
And I went from like not being able to write a single line of code in May to like now I have put into production like some Python models that are mission critical for my client. And I told them after the fact, I was like, by the way, when you hired me, I didn't know how to code. And they were like, what? You fooled us. So fake it till you make it.
That's awesome. That is fantastic. And are you mostly focusing on Python right now? Are there any other languages that you'd recommend folks focus on?
It depends. Like Python and SQL, I think it's good to know more than one
Yeah.
language because then you can deploy the best tool for the job.
Yeah.
A lot of what I was doing was like these really complex matching algorithms that would be crazy to do in SQL, so I did them in Python.
Yeah. Yep.
But then basic just table joins, like SQL is
Yeah.
like the
You got
right
to get
tool
the
for the
data.
job.
Yeah.
You got to get the data, and like so I built all these DBT models that were like SQL and then Python in the middle, and then SQL takes the result, and so you just use the right language for the job.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's great. I think you get so much mileage out of those too. Don't overthink it too much. Like you got to get the data out with SQL, and then Python is extremely flexible. So yeah, that's really good advice there.
And I would say like also I'm doing the opposite of what a lot of people are doing. Like I got like AI has come out and everyone's like, oh, AI is going to take engineers' jobs. Like, don't become an engineer, become a product person. And I like when it came out, I was like, oh, now I can be an engineer. Like as a product person, the most annoying thing is like stuff gets lost in translation between the PM and the engineer. Like, and you just don't understand each other's worlds. Like, engineers have to work at such a more like they need to disambiguate this like kind of high level vision of the PM. And I'm like, whoa, now I can do that work myself. So I'm like eliminating this communication bottleneck by being the engineer and the PM in one brain. So that's kind of my career advice, is like if you can combine multiple roles in one brain, you like eliminate a lot of like unnecessary communication where stuff gets lost in translation. I think you can build better products that way. Whereas,
I love that.
Yeah. That was why I was like, if you're a PM, become an engineer. If you're an engineer, become a PM.
Yeah, I've literally used that same exact analogy, like two people in one brain before, for a little slightly different, but with analytics and marketing together.
Totally.
Because, there's usually, and again, thinking like B2C paid marketing at scale, there's usually a marketer who owns the P&L and is an expert in the channel. So like they understand Google ads, Facebook ads, and all that stuff. And then there's a data person that's helping them collect the data and optimize and doing the hard stuff with the data that they can't do. But like you just said, the lost in translation piece, really, there is a lot of loss there. And when you can get somebody who's been a data person and kind of get them educated on the marketing platforms and give them the keys, I've seen that to be a very successful model. Again, specifically on the B2C side, because you have both of those thinking in one brain that's fully connected versus like the data person doesn't totally understand the channels, so they don't know how the data needs to be, so they can't build the right structure. But then when you get it all together, it's really powerful. So
totally. Yeah.
It's awesome advice to be to kind of straddle two different things to unlock a superpower. Let's go. If you're okay, we still got time for a couple more.
Yeah, let's go.
I know you got the little one to get back to. Probably
she's not screaming, sure. So we're good.
Perfect. Yeah. Here's one. This is from Axe. Can we talk about landing the first data role in B2C, especially in the current market? Are there any personal projects you would recommend if you don't have any experience yet?
Yeah, this is really interesting. So I have a pretty firm belief that like don't apply for jobs. Because I think if you're an applicant on a job, you're just one CV in a stack of 200, and it's like basically impossible to differentiate yourself. I think like developing a social media presence is like one of the most valuable things you could do for your career. So just like write your first LinkedIn post. Just post anything about like what you've learned in your current job, of like a project you're doing, something to share some insight you have with the world. And then write your second one. And then write your third one. And like over time, you just develop this kind of public persona where people start coming to you with jobs and you don't need to apply anymore. It's like, so my current job, my interview was one question, and it was, when can you start? And it's because I went to a guy who I've known for 8 years. I met him at a conference. And then we had like quarterly meetups for 8 years. And I was like, I said to him one day, I was like, I'm ready to join your company. Like, can I do that? And yeah, he just said, yeah, when can you start? And I said, Friday. He was like, all right, you're joining in 3 days. Yeah, you get to that network by just putting yourself out there and sharing your knowledge with the world. So the sharing part is, in my view, almost more important than having the experience. It's like there's so many people out there that have amazing experience and they never share it. And it's like if you had a third of the experience and you 100x the profile of like sharing it, you would be in a better spot.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about kind of like the problem you're trying to solve as somebody trying to get their first job, it's like you need the skills and you need people to know you have the skills. And the second part is just as important. And we've seen tons of people. I love that you said just kind of get active on LinkedIn. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. We've seen people do that with, hey, I'm learning this, or I built this dashboard and here's how I think it could be impactful. And you don't have to have the expert persona. You can come in as the learner and, hey, I'm passionate about this and I'm excited. And it's kind of an endearing thing when people start to see you putting in the work. And we've just had a lot of students follow that same playbook. Just getting active on LinkedIn has led to, a bunch of months of nothing happening. And then all of a sudden, hiring manager that saw you 2 months ago says, hey, actually, we just had this role open up. Would you want to come in and present your project to the team? And that's the interview, and it's like, that's so much better to be hunted than to hunt. So I love that you're pushing people to do that.
And even like, you don't necessarily need to speak to the company that you're trying to get a job at. Speak to like whoever was you a year ago. I follow a lot of people who give advice to early career starters just because I don't want to be a dinosaur. I'm like, what's going on in the world of like people graduating college right now? I find that super interesting. Like, is university even relevant anymore? Like, what's going on in the mind of Gen Z? I don't want to become a dinosaur. So I follow people like Megan Liu to just be like, because she speaks to that audience. And I'm like, I want to understand what's going on in the mind of that audience. So you don't have to necessarily speak to the employer, just speak to somebody who will find your message interesting, and you'll accrue this whole other, like, you'll create a wave around you and accrue a whole bunch of followers who do have the position to give you a job. I
love it. I think that is perfect advice. And I think couldn't think of better advice to give people to end it on. Thank you so much for all this really good stuff. I mean, the chat was very clear that there was a lot of value added. So I think folks were really appreciative of it. Folks, thank you for coming. Please give Bethany some love here in the chat and tell us what you think. And yeah, Bethany would love to do this again with you anytime. You're fantastic here. I'm sure the audience would echo our thoughts there.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. It's been fun.
All right. Cheers. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye.